After 2 years of anticipation and excitement since the reveal of Silent Hill 2 Remake back in 2022, we can finally now say that we can close this chapter with a very happy ending. The game has officially been released, and it's a massive success, with more than 1 million copies sold in less than a week. The quality inside the game also lived up to the expectations, and we got amazing visuals, a spooky atmosphere, and an emotional narrative with realistic facial expressions. But with that being said, the question in our minds always remains, what's next for the Silent Hill series in general? Because make no mistake, the main reason people are happy with Silent Hill 2's commercial success is because they see it as a motivation for Konami to bring the series back to life and give us more and more games.
What the hell? What's going on here?
In this specific discussion, there's always two types of people. On one side, you have players who enjoy the idea of remaking classic Silent Hill games, and they simply want more remakes. But, on the other hand, there are gamers who think we should end the chapter of remakes with Silent Hill 2, and focus on new installments with new stories and journeys. Now, in my opinion, both sides have logical arguments, and I can make a case for both groups, but I personally lean more to one side because of multiple reasons. In this quick video, I'm going to explain why remakes can have certain risks that people can overlook, and I'm also going to highlight some concerns about which games deserve a remake and why sometimes moving forward with new titles is the best decision. So, without further ado, let's dive right in. Following the success of Silent Hill 2 Remake, people's appetite for more remakes started getting bigger, and for many, the clear next candidate in line should be none other than Silent Hill 3. However, in my humble opinion, this might not be the best idea at all, for creative reasons and also commercial aspects as well. The first reason is that Silent Hill 3 is literally the only game among the classics that actually still holds up to this day when it comes to gameplay mechanics. I mean, even though classic Silent Hill games are notorious for their clunky controls and bizarre animations, Silent Hill 3 is basically the only one on the list that doesn't have such weakness. Or at least, it's not really a problem you can feel while playing the game. The game refined the combat mechanics introduced in Silent Hill 2, making it way more responsive, and it also allowed for better weapon handling and smoother character movements, which enhanced the general experience of engaging with enemies. And when it comes to weapons, ooh boy, it's basically so creative and generous that it can get ridiculous at times. The game offered a diverse arsenal, including melee weapons and firearms, giving you more choices on how to approach combat. This variety helped cater to different playstyles, whether you prefer to engage with enemies directly or avoid fighting altogether. In other words, if we're talking about remaking games to refine their mechanics for modern audiences, Silent Hill 3 should actually be the last on the list because the original plays just fine even by today's standards. And if we go even deeper and take the story into account, we will reach a more clear conclusion that remaking 3 doesn't really make any sense at this point. Keep in mind that Silent Hill 3's journey is the direct continuation of a story that started in the original game, which means that playing 3 before the original would leave you confused, and you'll not understand anything going on. Most characters here are connected to the original, and if you don't learn about their background, you will think that the story is shallow and vague. So releasing a remake for a modern audience will not really have any impact on them, because it will feel like a piece of a puzzle that they know nothing about. The reason Silent Hill 2 is a different case is because its story is completely isolated from any other game and it's entirely a standalone journey. James and all the characters here are new faces, and they have separate backgrounds, which means that remaking the game is much easier.
I don't know why, but I just love it here. It's so peaceful.
So, to be honest, I don't really imagine that remaking Silent Hill 3 after 2 is a smart idea by any means, especially if you want to expand the game's fan base. Now, I know some people might say I'm complicating things and I'm talking blah blah blah, but I'm really convinced these details do actually have a huge influence on any game's success. Every argument I used with Silent Hill 3 is basically meaningless with the original, because this one is far from having any convenient mechanics that can appeal to modern gamers. Being a PlayStation 1 title, Silent Hill 1 was limited by early 3D graphics, controls, and audio technology. Improving these aspects could make it way more immersive and accessible while keeping its unique, unsettling atmosphere. Improved visuals, smoother controls, and enhanced sound design could also elevate the experience significantly. Not only that, but with today's technology, the foggy, desolate town of Silent Hill could be rendered in much more detail, enhancing its atmosphere in a similar way to Silent Hill 2 Remake. A remake could also build upon the original's psychological elements, using modern mechanics to introduce new layers of suspense and fear. Features like realistic enemy behaviors and environmental interactions could intensify the psychological horror. Because, in case you don't know, Silent Hill 1 was actually very disturbing, and there's eerie calmness in its dark places. And by the way, a remake would have a chance to expand scenes as well, which can provide new details that deepen the lore of Silent Hill Town and its connection to the supernatural occurrences of later games.
Were you ringing that bell?
I've been expecting you. It was foretold by gyromancy.
What are you talking about?
I knew you'd come.
This can help tie the game more closely to every other installment, creating a more cohesive narrative. And speaking of narrative, this Silent Hill game is the one that started everything. So remaking it makes a lot of sense because modern gamers can have a chance to understand the background of each character and what the Order cult is really about. This includes some iconic characters like Dahlia Gillespie, who is a crazy, ruthless woman that can even be scarier than Pyramid Head sometimes. So, in conclusion, I think remaking the original Silent Hill is a very reasonable idea that should be a priority over 3. However, my personal choice is beyond those 2 games. Believe it or not, if you ask me which Silent Hill game needs to be remade next, I will tell you that Downpour deserves it the most because no game in the series deserves justice more than this one. This game had an incredible vision and so much potential, but it was all limited by technical issues, an unpolished combat system, and a gloomy Silent Hill fanbase that was already frustrated with the franchise's decline. A remake is very needed because it can give Downpour a second chance to stand out as a memorable part of Silent Hill rather than being overshadowed by earlier titles in the golden era. Just like Silent Hill 2, Downpour explores sensitive themes like guilt, redemption, and moral ambiguity, and features an anti-hero protagonist, Murphy Pendleton, a prisoner with a complicated past. Murphy is a charismatic character and a bizarre one, because you actually can't understand at first if he's a good guy who's been through hell, or if he's a bad person facing the consequences of his actions. In my humble opinion, Murphy is a much more interesting protagonist than people think he is, and he deserves a revival so people can explore his narrative more deeply.
Sir, we've got everything under control.
Where's my son? Where's Charlie?
Please, Mr. Pendleton, you don't want to be here. Let one of my officers drive you back to the command center, and we'll call you when...
Where's my boy? Is he out there? Charlie! Charlie!
However, what makes this Silent Hill game more unique is that the visual details in the environment and the freedom of exploration are insanely expanded compared to any other game in the series. The town here has some truly haunting places, with weather effects like rain that you can see on Murphy's clothes, which is something that many modern games don't even show. But as I said earlier, the freedom of exploration here is seriously impressive and might annoy you sometimes, because you need to open your eyes widely in every area to find something casually sitting around. I'm talking about large houses with big rooms, restaurants, gas stations, and pretty much any area you would expect in an actual town. This allowed us to have so many side quests for the first time in Silent Hill's history. But with that being said, limitations in graphics and technology in 2012 prevented full immersion, which means that a remake could elevate these elements way further for modern audiences. Furthermore, the story is relatively suspenseful because there's more than one person seeking revenge and redemption here. In a certain scenario, Murphy is a symbol of evil that someone else wants to destroy, but in another scenario, Murphy is the one seeking revenge due to what happened to his son. Both scenarios eventually intertwine and reach a point of confusion where everything is not really as it seems.
You killed him! You killed the boogeyman!
And, by the way, even the main antagonist here is not clearly shown to you at the beginning because he's not a typical enemy. Officer George Sewell in the game doesn't necessarily operate as a primary villain, but he's actually the most evil person in the story, despite his generic role. This guy is a douchebag, to say the least, because I don't want to mention any bad words in the video. He is corrupt and manipulative and takes advantage of his position as a prison guard. He engages in shady practice and uses his authority to exploit inmates for personal gain, regardless if it leads to painful results for others. I don't want to spoil the entire story for you, but in summary, George represents the regret that Murphy feels because their deals together led to a very tragic event.
Hey Murphy, remember, this is a limited time offer, my friend.
I'll let you know.
After the initial scenes, he mainly haunts Murphy throughout the game in the form of flashbacks and memories. His character serves as a catalyst for Murphy's journey and symbolizes the nefarious influence of power and vengeance, themes central to the narrative of Silent Hill games in general.
Guys like Napier, they've got no business breathing the same air as you and me, right?
However, despite his sneaky behavior and jerky smirks, George is among the most charismatic antagonists you can ever face. Not because he has a good personality or morals, but because he plays the role of a corrupt officer like a charm, in a way that makes you hate him even in real life. So, if I'm being honest, I really have a soft spot for Downpour, and want it to be remade because it's simply the Silent Hill game that had a lot of things right but came out during a horrible time for the franchise. The enemies themselves here didn't have a chance to mark their presence in the series, even though they can be genuinely terrifying in many areas. They can jump on your back out of nowhere. They can attack you from the ceiling, and they can sometimes come in groups to make your mission harder. And speaking of enemies and antagonists, there's one more Silent Hill game I consider my second choice in possible remakes, and I believe it deserves a chance to come back, specifically because of its antagonist. This game, ladies and gentlemen, is considered the most disturbing in the series, without a shadow of a doubt. And we even have a video on the channel explaining its entire story to highlight exactly why. But to make it simple for you, the primary setting here is basically what makes it recognizable and more unique than anything we played. The story initially takes place inside room 302 in an apartment complex, where the protagonist, Henry, is mysteriously stuck inside and can't even open the door to leave.
What the hell? What's going on here?
So instead of typical free-roaming exploration in Silent Hill Town, the game takes place largely within Henry's apartment, which serves as a hub between different worlds by using a disturbing hole in the bathroom's wall. But listen, the apartment is somehow a safe zone and a place of psychological horror simultaneously as it gradually becomes more haunted and sinister. And by the way, Silent Hill 4 is the first in the series to ever introduce a first-person perspective, and you can experience this exclusively in the apartment. It creates a more intimate and claustrophobic experience similar to something we saw in PT 10 years later.
The guy who lives here, what's he like anyway?
However, make no freaking mistake. What made this game extremely popular is not the setting or the protagonist, it's actually none other than the complex antagonist, who literally operates as the main character in the entire story. His name is Walter Sullivan, and he's a tragic character whose dark past and disturbed psyche drive much of the game's horror. On one side, you can see him as an innocent child seeking help, but on the other, you can see adult Walter. And he is a crazy serial killer with a deep relation to the paranormal elements of Silent Hill. Walter was born in room 302, where Henry now lives. But shortly after his birth, he was abandoned by his parents and placed in an orphanage run by the cult known as the Order, which is prominent in Silent Hill lore. The orphanage exposed him to disturbing teachings and rituals that left him mentally scarred, feeding his obsession with finding a mother figure and his attachment to Room 302, which he believes to be his true mother. Like literally. This ultimately led him to believe the only way to reunite with his mother was by completing a ritual that required killing 21 specific people, and Henry himself is on the list. But even though Henry here is the protagonist, he's actually inside Walter's story and not the other way around. And by the way, let me be clear, Walter's existence is not straightforward as you think, because he actually appears in two different forms as a ghostly, unkillable entity and also as a physical presence in the game's world. His spirit haunts different locations, including Henry's apartment, making him a constant threat. But at some point, you find yourself asking the question, is he really purely evil? Well, the answer is no, he's not. He is mainly a sad figure shaped by abandonment, lack of affection, and indoctrination from the cult.
I got this from Miss Galvin a long time ago. She was younger than me back then.
In other words, this guy is so sad in a way that actually makes you forget about Henry entirely. His actions stem from his distorted understanding of love and salvation, making him a scary enemy and a sympathetic character at the same time. The game reveals details about his life by using various documents and notes, showing how he became a victim of the cult's manipulation and how his desperation led him down a dark path. The small, innocent boy slowly became a heartless serial killer because life never gave him a chance to experience love, especially from a mother that he was always wishing to have. This emotional narrative actually makes you feel sorry for Walter, despite his evil actions during his adulthood. And let me tell you, you will never focus on Henry here. Walter is simply why the story exists, and Henry is just your guide to live in this story and witness Walter's trauma, agony, and his desperate attempts to reach happiness. Anyway, enough with the sadness. My point here is that Walter's iconic character as an antagonist is basically my #1 reason for my desire to see this game come back with a modern touch. I mean, let me be clear. Every other aspect in the game is actually flawed, and I would say a downgrade compared to Silent Hill 3. The combat in Silent Hill 4 is insanely clunky, like it's nobody's business, and it's less engaging than ever. Henry's movements are slow, very, very slow, and the fighting system has less fluidity and depth than earlier titles. At some point, the combat can become repetitive, especially when facing hordes of enemies, which led many players to feel the game in general is not worth it because encounters turn into a chore rather than a challenge. Furthermore, the game also includes several sections where backtracking is necessary. You must revisit previous locations multiple times to complete certain objectives, which can make the game feel unnecessarily stretched out and, frankly, even boring sometimes. So if you could fix all these technical problems and bring back Walter Sullivan in a faithful manner, then Silent Hill 4 would be a very strong candidate for a remake, especially since its story is relatively isolated from other entries. In conclusion, and to sum up this video very simply, I personally rank Downpour on top when it comes to Silent Hill games I want to be remade. It's a very rich game, and it's the most creative one in the mechanics department, but it definitely needs a second chance in order for people to even know of its existence. Because let's be real, 2012 was not a year when the franchise was relevant, and even the fan base expected Downpour to suck even before its release. Being a standalone story is also a very crucial reason to remake it, because you're not causing any confusion for new fans by doing so. This is the same reason why Silent Hill 4 is my second choice, and why remaking it makes a lot of sense as well. The story is a fresh journey isolated from the main plot, even though it has some references to Silent Hill 1 and 3. And speaking of plot, the original Silent Hill is my third choice, because bringing it back is the only way people can understand Silent Hill 3 and the general lore. You simply can't remake 3 before the original, because that will throw the story out the window, and everything will seem like a mess. I can be wrong, by the way, so tell me in the comments what your choices are, because I'm interested in discovering different arguments that I probably missed, and I want to see how many people agree with my logic, especially with Downpour. Anyway, give me a like if you enjoyed this video, and join the channel as a member if you want to support us, and I hope to see you soon.
I can't. I can't. I'm sorry. I can't do it.